Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. For our event, organizations across sectors made anti-racist commitments. Where are we now? My name is Lynn Perry Wooten, and I'm the president of Simmons University and a proud University of Michigan alumna. Today's discussion is based on the special issue of Currents, a multidisciplinary journal published by Michigan Publishing, titled Are Anti-Racism Efforts Having an Impact in Organizations and Communities? I am pleased to have served as a co-editor along with Dr. Robert Sellers, the Charles D. Moody Collegiate Professor of Psychology and Professor of Education. The special issue was released this past December and features 8 publications spanning community and projects across the country. Today, we feature 2 of these publications and want to extend an especially warm welcome to the authors and their collaborators who will join our panel discussion. We welcome Reverend Vernon Williams, who is the assistant professor at Founding Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, and Claudia Cohen. Claudia is the original member of the Summit Interfaith Council Anti-Racism Committee and is the founder and president of the Third Alternative, LLC. The Third Alternative specializes in DEI programming, conflict resolution competency, and dignity-based leadership, and consults primarily with leaders and boards of nonprofit organizations. Joining Claudia and Vernon are 2 other panelists, Dr. Whitney Peoples, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and Charlene Vandeventer, who is the Health Equity Manager at the Washtenaw County Health Department. Finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator, and as I mentioned, my co-editor of the special issue. Dr. Rob Sellers, thank you for moderating today's panel, and we look forward to joining this important and timely discussion on DEI efforts across organizations.
Lynn, thank you as always. It's a pleasure to be a part of such important work, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to work with this great panel today. And as a co-editor of the special issue, it was my great pleasure to read about this really important and exciting work. And in order for the larger audience to get some sense of the work, I'm going to actually start off and ask first Claudia and Vernon to talk about their work on dialogue circles on race as it relates to your community in Salem.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'll go first, and good afternoon or morning or evening, depending on your time zone. As Lynn said, I'm Claudia Cohen. About my commitment to anti-racism or DEI work. I grew up in residentially segregated California suburbs in the 1960s and 70s, and my first racial awakening, if you will, was during the period of integration and the emergence of the Black Power movement. Over the years, publicized incidents of police brutality, primarily against Black men, periodically broke through to me, and I was, of course, shocked and horrified. But it was only over the last dozen years or so that I began to see my role in the system of racial hierarchy and oppression more clearly. To paraphrase Debbie Irving, I've been waking up to whiteness. So how to intervene in that system? Well, as an educator and facilitator, I naturally gravitated toward the importance of both individual learning and programming for small, diverse groups. I trained as a social psychologist with a career-long interest in identity-based stereotypes. So it also seemed important to me that we try to debunk some of those stereotypes by learning the true history of the United States. Therefore, I was thrilled to join the newly organized anti-racism committee of the Summit Interfaith Council and to join and become a dialogue circles on race facilitator when they were first launched in 2015. So what are dialogue circles? They're a structured series of small group conversations about systemic racism. Let's see, sorry. Specially trained co-facilitators lead these group sessions, and conversations are informed by readings and other materials that contain accurate and painful accounts of US history. Unlike, and this is really, I think, the critical point, in addition to exposing white and people of color to the true history that most of us did not learn in school, dialogues, unlike discussions or debates, emphasize deep listening and an authentic sharing of reactions and experiences, not showing off or winning a point, as happens sometimes in debate or discussion. So the dialogue provides this container, a framework designed to enable conversations about challenging topics while preserving and deepening the relationships. We offer 2 semesters a year. We have been doing this since 2015 with somewhere between 5 and 9 co-facilitated groups each semester. We've reached close to 1,000 participants in that time. Currently offering 2 curriculum, and we can say more about this later, 1.0 for those beginning the journey, and 2.0 as a deeper, more powerful experience. We're currently developing a 3rd curriculum to analyze our system of white privilege and power and how it impacts non-white groups beyond the Black-white binary. I can tell you a little bit later about the impact and how we measure it, but the fact that so many participants have come back and told others about dialogue circles, and the fact that we've been going strong since 2015 amazes me and makes me very grateful. So let me hand it to Vernon, and he can tell you more about the background.
Thank you, Claudia. Hello, I am Reverend Vernon Williams, and I'm a founding member of the Anti-Racism Committee of the Summit Interfaith Council in Summit, New Jersey. Currently, I serve as the assistant pastor at the Fountain Baptist Church in Summit, and also a co-convener of our Anti-Racism Committee and one of the many facilitators of our dialogue circles on race. So while we were highly successful in engaging adults in these difficult conversations, when we initially began, we realized we failed to include an important segment that is being impacted by racism, bias issues, and the actual individuals who really instigated us down this path of dialogue circles, and that's our teens. And so therefore, STAR was born. And STAR is an acronym that stands for Strong Teens Against Racism. Due to the sensitive nature of the subject and recognizing it's a difficult conversation, we decided to engage a consultant who was highly specialized in working with teens in this area. And we were able to find a local consultant, Roots, Inclusive Roots Project, Roots being an acronym that stands for Rising Over Oppression Through Solidarity. Roots engaged our teens, and we worked with them to engage them in 3 critical areas that we thought were important. That's assisting our youth in understanding racism and its insidious effects on their shared humanity. 2, provide youth tools to counteract racism and as they encounter it. And 3, with our youth to develop social ethics that lifts and celebrates their shared humanity and to be able to host forums and community conversations. We've witnessed our STAR teams win awards such as the Keepers of the Dream in Summit, New Jersey, and the Princeton Prize in Race Relations over the years. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it really kind of impacted us and our work that we've done with our teams. And so we have elicited the help of one of our former cohorts who recently graduated from college to be our STAR youth coordinator. And so there's just some of the work that we have done with adults and teens in the Summit community. Thank you. You're muted, Rob.
Sorry about that. I knew I was going to do that sooner or later. Thank you both. And now I'm going to ask Whitney and Charlene to please talk a little bit about their project and themselves, the ARC project, the Anti-Racist Counties and Cities Towards Justice project. Whitney, do you want to start off?
Thank you, Rob. I'm actually going to turn it over to Charlene to kick us off, if that's okay.
Oh, that's perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlene Vandevenner, and I'm the Health Equity Manager at the Washington County Health Department. And I'm excited to talk about our Arc Towards Justice project. So this project really kind of looks to and was designed to better understand the constraints and affordances in incorporating and implementing anti-racist frameworks within a health department. And also developing those tools to aid that work. So I think working in a health department, a lot of health departments do not have the support to meaningfully implement anti-racist frameworks just between like how to do that work. And so as we were trying to build this toolkit, I think especially in 2020, there was a lot of fatigue and stress that came from addressing the pandemic and the crises that we were all looking at. And so some of that impacts the capacity to incorporate, this new framework of how to really do this work and put it within our everyday policies, procedures. And so we kind of worked with University of Michigan and our team, and we worked with and made a new tool with our community partners. And so through a lot of listening, so through surveys, focus groups with the health department staff, or with our community members, critical listening, lots of dialogue, we were able to kind of co-create a tool. And right now we are in the process of getting ready to pilot that tool this coming spring. And so that is a very exciting next step. Whitney, what did I miss?
You didn't miss anything. I'll just say for myself, as someone who has over 20 years of work in anti-racist and social justice work, this project was really exciting for me because it helped us think about how do we operationalize these ethical commitments? What does this look like on the ground? And I think the health department is one place where we started, but I think this feeling of, okay, how do I take this from a commitment to an action is something that, I've seen across lots of organizations that I've worked with. And so this project really just gave us a chance to do a deep dive to think, what are the tools, what are the resources, what are the critical capacities and knowledge areas that organizations need to be successful. And I think ultimately to build long-term stamina for this work. So this project, the ARC project, working with Charlene, working with the team at the health department, really offered a really important case study and opportunity to explore that. So very excited to be able to share more about it today.
Great. So one of the things that is fundamental to both of the projects and the work that you're doing is the work in the community. Oftentimes we talk about anti-racism in an academic setting, and we talk about it in this broader theoretical framework. And while an academic setting is a community in and of itself, there's often larger communities out there that are not benefiting from these efforts, and our understanding as academics are not taking into consideration how anti-racism is working, could be working better in the community setting. And so one of the questions I want to sort of start off with is noting that anti-racism work in the community requires a focus on confronting exploitation, historic, systemic racial discrimination. Can you talk about how you were able to build the trust necessary to do this important work. And I'd like to start off with Claudia and Vernon. You know, your work was starting off in the context of a religious setting and a set of religious relationships. Can you talk a little bit about what the benefits were of being in that situation versus not?
Sure. I'll start, Claudia, and then I'll let you jump in. And so, the Summit Interfaith Council, we have as our mission to seek the welfare of the city, coming from the Hebrew scriptures of Jeremiah 29, verse 7. And so, with that in mind, we were intentional about recognizing and acknowledging the fact that racism is one of the evils that separates us, that divides us, that dehumanizes not only people of color, but also making sure that we that we highlight that it impacts whites as well, and probably in terms of psychologically, possibly even more. Although people of color not only feel the extreme impact psychologically, but also physically. And so one of the things, we have an instant, if you will, allyship is what we recognize. And we sought to, utilize that to open up our houses of worship to be safe spaces for conversations to just take place, to be into to talk about it as a thing, if you will. And who better in the public square, perhaps, to be the moral voice than faith leaders, if you will. We certainly saw, with Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel, as they came together and began to work against systemic issues of race and racism, and how when that partnership, was truly began to go beyond allyship to say like solidarity, comrades, that changes began to happen. And so, and so we as the Interfaith Council decided that we would be more intentional, and that, let's just start with people within our settings, within our congregation. And so that was, for us to do this, at the public, and community, was just a natural starter for us.
I would just add three things. One, it's two sort of building on what Vernon said, and then sort of a cautionary piece. One is that we began before the pandemic and we met in person, which was lovely. And we met initially at the different houses of worship. And of course, people in any dialogue circle were from all over town and outside of the community over time as well. And there was a kind of solidity and a kind of moral commitment, I think, that we all felt by operating in that context. The other thing, let me say what my qualifier is. At the same time, religion can be alienating to people who aren't part of one of those religions, or who may see themselves as spiritual, but not as part of a particular religious community. So we make it very clear that our discussions are not religious. We don't include prayers. So even though many of our facilitators and some of our participants are religious leaders, it's really what gets people there. But once they're there, we're really talking about America, American history, and occasionally the role of religion, but it's a non-religious discussion. Thank you.
So before I turn the question over to Whitney and Charlene, I want to catch something that I was remiss in framing earlier. I want to make sure that we invite our audience for this conversation to be a part of this conversation. So please include in the Q&A questions that you may have for the panelists and or the panel as a whole. And I promise you we will get to them as we intersperse this conversation. So Whitney and Charlene, again, communities important, and the nature of your relationship the university research community connecting with the community public health system. There's a long history of the universities working with communities, and some of that history is not always the best. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences in terms of, as you were developing this partnership, how you dealt with that history, where in many cases issues of exploitation have come, where the community has felt exploited and been exploited with regards to an extractive relationship, where the researchers are extracting from the community without providing the community with benefit and input.
Absolutely, Robin. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So, Vernon, I think you used the terms earlier of instant allyship, or something in that way. And I think if you all had the benefit of that, that is absolutely wonderful. I think we thought we might have the benefit of that. We thought we are a multiracial team of researchers coming in wanting to talk about how to make the county health department more anti-racist. And we assumed that that would be welcome and everybody would be on board with that. And that, we would sort of get a coalition of the willing and we would go. And what we encountered instead, though, were a lot of questions, a lot of skepticism that was really rooted in, understandably, past hurt and past harm, not just with the county health department we worked with, but folks' experiences more broadly, right? Folks drawing on the experiences of family and friends and all manner of things. And so the first thing that we had to do was we had to listen, and we had to cultivate belief. And that piece, I think, is really important, right? So when we are presented with information that may feel counter to who we are or what we think our intentions are, or our desired impacts are, right? We, might have that moment to say, well, that's not me. Well, that's not our research team. Well, that, we have that same critique of the university, right? So instead of taking a defensive posture and attempting to set ourselves apart, it was really cultivating belief and listening to community and saying, what does it mean if everything that they're saying is true and right? How are we implicated? So it was listening and cultivating belief. And then it was just acknowledging and reconciling our own implicatedness in those histories as a result of benefiting from the resources of the university, because we were, right? We were working with grant money from the university. We were working with the credibility and the credentials that we get from universities. And so we had to take a step back and say, okay, we hear you. And then I think after that, cultivating belief and that really getting clear about the way that we are implicated as a research team and as a research project, we had to do this important work of relationship over task. And so that meant that we slowed our timeline down so that we could do the work of listening to community members, coming to spend time in community spaces. So not just showing up at meetings to make an ask, but if there's a community cleanup day, there's a community celebration day, are we invited? Might we attend? Might we spend time with you? So actually building relationships with folks, and then doing the important work of closing the loop. So coming back and saying, we went and talked to this person or that person. We looked and found these documents. You told us you submitted to this, and we went and found those letters of support and we've read them. So affirming for people, we heard you, we believed you, and we went and did the due diligence and we found those things. And so now here's how we're shifting our approach, right? Here's how we're changing our ask. Maybe we're not making an ask at all anymore. But those were some of the ways that we really had to stop. And I think that really the main parts for me were the cultivating belief, recognizing our own implication, and then deciding that the relationship was more important than the task or the timeline. We really wanted community to be a part of focus groups. And at some point, our team said, maybe we don't get that this time, right? But here's what we might get instead. And that was critical. So we didn't get instant allyship. We had to really work to do, this space of cultivating some trust and some accountability with community members. Charlene, I think there was another piece in there, but I want to make sure that Charlene has a chance to hop in here too.
Yes, I thank you for all of that and sharing that, because you're right. I think, looking at how we were addressing a lot of stuff, we wanted to make sure that we started slowing down to make sure that we were listening. And a lot of times we have a lot of work that we've done around community engagement at the health department, where we were trying to, again, build those relationships before you went with an ask, before it was, we just need something, or we want to share this, or having it be just sort of like this one way sharing of information. And so this whole working with the ARC project really did kind of cement that slow down relationship over process, making sure that we are taking the time, because it does take that time to build that trust and those relationships. And it is so important, especially since we will always be there. The community is always there, and we are here within that community to do that work.
Great. So the next question that I have is, you began this work before COVID, or we're at a very different time now, particularly in the context of anti-racism and DEI. So it seems like we've had this neck-breaking shift from a moment where it felt like the country may actually be ready and willing to do the heavy work of coming to grips with institutional, historic, ongoing, systemic racism and its impact, to a place now that has swung an anti-DEI effort, where you have not only individuals, but very highly organized, highly committed, highly funded efforts to do everything from change curricula to changing laws that, in effect, are attacking the very idea of having these kinds of conversations, let alone actually making changes. Can you talk a little bit about how your work has been affected by this shift? And I open that up to all four of our panelists. Oh, Claudia, you're on mute.
Of course I'm muted. Okay, here we go. I can cite a couple of things maybe to get the conversation started. One is that we saw, as I mentioned, we offered 2 semesters a year with maybe 5 to 9 groups per semester. And after George Floyd was murdered, we had such interest that we had to schedule we were delighted, but we scheduled a 3rd semester that year. So more than 100 people more than usual participated. Since then, it's kind of gone back to where it was before, slowly, but back to where it was. So that's one before and after that I can speak to. Another is that and it's related, our enrollment has kind of steady stated, and we're now really investigating other ways to get the word out. And we don't know how much of it is because of this, aspersions, this negative attack against DEI. I do think, however, that we're not viewed so much as DEI. We're a very bottom-up, sort of grassroots initiative. We're associated with the Summit Anti-Racism Committee, of course, but I feel as though maybe we're under the radar a little bit for some of the attacks that I've observed or witnessed against institutional initiatives that impose DEI.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think we sort of operate because we are in the public. It is not, say, if you will, mandatory. That folks come to have these sit down with us with these conversations. but it's more on a voluntary basis. And so therefore, those who come have an idea, whether they have the language, whether they understand, there is this curiosity that they come, even if it's from the standpoint of, I don't think it's all real. There is this, and we're inviting them to this conversation. So the impact into, certainly there is always when there is a catalyzing event, there's going to be a lot of people, saying, okay, what can I do? And then once, the excitement over the catalyzing event wanes, you're left with those who are truly saying, okay, I do know that there is an issue and we want to do something. And so, I would say now that perhaps those who are really, who are coming to our conversations on race are truly seeking to say, hey, I want to learn more. I want to do something. And so, we're seeing individuals who now come in and say, I have agency. We had one individual who came in and said, okay, I see that there is this ill out there. And so I'm going to start locally within my community, this this organization where I will provide internship for people, youth of color. And so that was one of the things that has come out since COVID, and is very successful. So to some degree, we kind of bring folks in, try to give them language, try to give them education, if you will, that they would actually go back out into the public square to board of education meetings and to begin to push back against book banning, against the notion that CRT is being taught, if you will, the notion of trying to remove African American history. So we're kind of working, to put people out there who are fighting against it, if you will.
Okay.
I think I might say, for me, Vernon, what you were just describing makes a lot of sense to me and sounds very familiar, right? This sort of grassroots kind of investment and engagement. And I actually think that's always where the strength of equity work has been, is in grassroots commitments to community rights. Sort of broad social movements have really come out of grassroots efforts. And so where I do think we've seen some institutional kind of waning around this work, I don't think we see that in the grassroots and community spaces where people are really understanding that the stakes are even higher, right? I mean, I'm originally from the state of Texas. That's where all of my family is. I was just reading about the University of Texas laying off an additional, 60 some employees to be in compliance with the state law, or further in compliance. The university was in compliance, but they made the decision to lay those folks off. And so, but there, in a place like that, you still see a deep investment by folks who have long understood the importance of equity work. And so I don't think that part has changed. And I think that's an important thing to pay attention to. There's institutional and organizational commitment, but I really think a lot of the power of these movements hasn't necessarily been because corporate America recognized them, but has been because there was this grassroots, right? And of course, we want that engagement and partnership with organizations and institutions, but I don't ever want us to imagine that when those things are absent or when those things feel weaker, that therefore our movements are not as strong. The thing I think was interesting in doing this work in a health setting, right, with a public health group, is that what we actually met up with was a lot of fatigue. So people who wanted to do the work felt like the work was important, but were also tired, right? So if we're talking, 2020, the summer of 2020, what happens with the murder of George Floyd, with folks like Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, this is also happening months into the COVID-19 pandemic. And so these folks that we were working with at the health department are frontline workers. And a lot of what we heard was, yes, we want to, and also with what time, with what resources, with what support. We've given so much already. And so I think that was a piece, not so much that folks weren't invested or that their commitment was waning, but just that they were really dealing with, I think, fatigue. And I think another piece is, a misunderstanding of what these terms mean. So some people, when they hear anti-racism or DEI, they immediately think it's an attack or it's a policing force. And if you're talking about frontline healthcare workers who have been fielding critiques left, right, and center about how they did or didn't roll something out, or where they did or didn't get something wrong, then anything else that feels like it may be an attack or a critique, I think there's a little, I don't know. And so there was also, some work in trying to make sure folks understood this is not a surveillance thing. This is not a policing thing. We're not here to, wrap you on the knuckles and tell you that you got it wrong. We're actually here to help you understand that anti-racist frameworks can help you do your job better. They can help you better serve your mission in your community. And yes, they may take some additional work. And so let's talk seriously about fatigue and resourcing. But it also, helped us to think about how can we sort of set the record straight around these frameworks and what they mean and what they can do for institutions. That became a really important part of really trying to think about sort of, how do these national or global conversations about anti-racism and DEI begin to impact the work that we were trying to do with the health department. Charlene, anything there that you would add or that I'm missing?
I think, 2020, the summer was just so much. And I think when looking back now too, we kind of look and say like, well, there are these, we wanted to be able to do all of the interventions for COVID-19, testing sites and vaccinations and all of these things. And, just taking a couple of years back, we can kind of see that we needed those relationships. And so like, this is where I think our resolve to incorporate DEI and that anti-racist framework is really important, because how do we build those relationships so then that way that they're already standing before there's an emergency, before there's a crisis. So it just made it feel more important and more urgent that we have to do this work now.
And your answers actually presage one of the questions from the audience about pushback, and not just the skeptical pushback, but pushback that comes in different forms, as Whitney pointed out, and as Charlene pointed out, the pushback from those who might otherwise be allies but are tired, or are this is extra burden, or feel like in the context of dialogues, the last thing I need to do is talk about these issues, given the way that I'm living. How, and the ways in which you've been talking about how you've handled that has been important. We have another question from the audience that is a straightforward question, and that's from a person who's a future clinician and is looking for strategies that they might take in their practice to follow anti-racist precepts. How can they do their work in ways that are not just not racist, but are actually anti-racist in the nature of their work and engagement?
Well, I'll hop in here. The thing that I would say is to cultivate belief. And I really like to think of this as an active practice. So sometimes when we talk about believing people, we just talk about it as something you either do or you don't, that you hear it and then you either say, yep, I believe that, or no, I don't. But cultivating belief as a practice is really about, even if, especially perhaps if you feel like you don't believe it, really taking the time to ask more questions of the individual, really trying to understand how they're feeling, where they're coming from, what experiences they're drawing on, and then asking yourself, what if it's true? What if this thing is true that they're telling me? What's at stake for me? What does this say about me or my role as a clinician, my role as a researcher, if what they're saying is true? And then sit with the discomfort that likely comes up with that. But that work of cultivating belief, when I just think about some of the work that we've heard about around, say, pain management in medical settings and what this means for people of color who are not believed about their pain levels, right? What happens if you believe the populations that you work with about what they're experiencing? How would it change your care? How would it change how you talked to them or what you prescribed or what you suggested if you truly believed? And so I think that practice of cultivating belief, and really, even when the stakes are high for you as the clinician or the researcher, the teacher, the boss, the whoever it is, that I think is really important, because that is also a piece of not just cultivating belief, but cultivating shared humanity. I see you, I hear you, I recognize your hurt, and I'm invested in trying to find a way together to fix it. So I think the work of cultivating belief is a not the only, but a primary strategy.
Right.
Claudia?
Yeah, just to maybe a ray of hope, I think, from the dialogue circle work, to your point, Rob, about when people feel tired, and I'm not making the analogy to what frontline health workers went through in 2020 and beyond, but beaten down by reading the news or listening to, some of the outrageous and painful visions of America that are being expressed. We found that once people sat with others with different experiences, it's sort of an extension of what Whitney's saying, having that proximity and hearing from people of their experiences and reading about those experiences. Once people, and I'll say people who identify as white, understood and began to see the acculturalization that we all are exposed to, they were hungry for more. They felt that they were part of the problem and part of the solution. So I think, at least for dialogue circles, there's a way in which we're inviting people in, and the relationships they develop with others in the group and their commitment seems to grow. And that's very encouraging, because there's a lot of ways that, I can become discouraged. Vernon, would you agree with that there is a hunger and a desire to make change that we see as a result of the dialogue circle experience?
Sure, absolutely. There is that hunger and desire, and and folks are how do I make that change? And one of the things I think the dialogue circles helps them to do, and that is, as Whitney said, talking about our shared humanity, and what better way of doing that is to get proximate with folks, and beginning to engage, someone who is different than you. That begins to help you to be to increase your cultural competency. And so, as folks begin, especially, I work with an organization where we work with the housing, deficient, and nationally, we are, in order to work in this space, we are one of the things that we've done is there's a tool out there that helps us as a national board to work on our own cultural competency. So yes, we are thinking that we are doing the right things, but there's some language that we are using that is not helpful and pushing folks away. And so as we begin to work on our own cultural competency and what it is that we need to do in order to make sure that we are seeing, the other, the one that is different, and acknowledging and receiving their difference. That cultural competency piece becomes very important to be able to do our work better and to develop those relationships.
Okay. So one of the questions, and you've touched upon this a bit, but one of the questions that often gets raised is, how do you measure the success of your work? And I'd like to make this both a general statement in terms of how would you measure anti-racism success with regard to your work from an anti-racism perspective, but also what is it that you as individuals in this effort, what do you hope to see? What gives you hope? What makes you feel like what you have done or are continuing to do is having an impact?
I guess for me, what gives me hope and to see the impact is when folks come and are truly questioning and able to open up that here's this is where I'm at. There's we've all breathed in this this racism, this bias, all of those ills, and we regurgitate it, as good learners. And so when they come to say, I'm open, I'm ready to, I want to, how do I begin to counteract what I've been taught for years? And those who come and ready to critically think and to be challenged, not to be coddled, but to be able to sit in the tension that, I did do that. And this is what, and that was not healthy, not only for, perhaps what I foisted on others, but it's not healthy for me as a human being. And so that gives me hope to see folks are ready to be able to engage in such a way that says, I want to do better. I want to be better, and to recognize that I'm not there yet, but it's going to take some time, but I'm going to stay at it.
I would just add that we do evaluations after each dialogue circle, and we did an assessment a little while back. And what we hear over and over again is that people become much more comfortable speaking about race. They want to talk about it. They encourage other people to come to dialogue circles, and many people who had not sought out education about racism, often white identified people, join organizations that are doing work, come to presentations. So it's like a little spark maybe that gets lit. And, sometimes I find it even hard to believe because there's so much that's working, I feel, against it. But that's what keeps me going, is this spark. Also, there's a great sense of commitment and connection between people who are in a group. Sometimes they're meeting 3 years later on their own with book discussions, or going to events together about, anti-racism or about the history of America. And Vernon mentioned our kind of poster child who actually went out and started this amazing nonprofit organization. So when I'm feeling a lack of hope, I look at these folks who are waking up and want to stay engaged.
I think for us, success has been looking at, move through this whole project and really taking a moment to kind of recognize our history. So, there's been a lot of work that we've already done around building community, but then like having a chance to kind of solidify and recenter how to listen with curiosity, how to make sure that we're incorporating what we're listening into our plans and for the future. And that is a co-creation of that planning, that we're not just doing it alone. It is within and with lots of hands of support. And so I have felt like this process has been just illuminating. I think that it has been successful because then it actually is showing that we are committed to doing this work for the long term, and that this will be a longer push, but we are committed to that, and we're going to continue going forward.
I would just add to what Charlene is saying there I've been thinking a lot about the importance of imagination and possibility making in this work. And I think especially when we're thinking in terms of institutions and organizations, we're often working within so many rules and policies that predate us, that feel so much bigger than us. And so, I think the most important thing is when folks can say, okay, but maybe I see a way, right? So the ability to find those paths, to take the risk and suggest them, but the imagination and the possibility making, I think that's for me what success looks like at this stage of anti-racism work, is that we don't feel foreclosed. in our work, that we know that it's possible to find a new path. So the answer doesn't need to be no, but maybe it's okay, but how, right? How do we get around this thing? I think that's our greatest strength, is being able to cultivate imagination and find possibility.
Well, I wish we could go on for much longer. It feels like we were just getting to it. Unfortunately, our time is running much faster than we had expected. I just want to say personally, I've taken a lot away from our discussion today, and reading the papers and the work that you're doing. And to the audience, if you have not already, I strongly encourage and even challenge you to read the special issue. Not only do our four panelists provide great insight and inspiration with respect to their work that they're doing, but the entire issue is dedicated to these types of anti-racist activities and commitments that ultimately will make the difference. And so I'm going to borrow from you, Vernon, and ask Lynn to give us the benediction and the good word as we leave, and to thank the panelists for the opportunity to engage with you today. So, Lynn.
Thank you for the benediction. Probably not as good as Vernon, but honored to do that. Vernon, Claudia, Whitney, Charlene, and Rob, thank you. This has been a remarkable, energizing panel and discussion. There are a couple of things that I think all of us take away. One is, doing the work of anti-racism requires us to be everyday leaders. And to be everyday leaders is to be courageous. It is to seize the opportunity. It's to use our privilege and power to make a positive difference. And that's what your research has shown. That's what the papers and their special issue do. Secondly, what we heard is really doing this work means being in community. Relationships matter. Sometimes we have to put the task aside, as we heard, and prioritize the relationships. And when we're in community, we realize that we're our brother and sister's keepers, and it's the circle of life. It's in our DNA to be in community. And to be a good anti-racism leader requires being in community. I love all the discussion that we had about dialogue. We know that anti-racism leadership and doing the work is about being in dialogue. It's a two-way street. As we heard, it's listening, it's storytelling, it's bringing people to the table to understand those differences and to chart a path forward. We talked a lot about allyship. And we heard that we need more than allyships. We need partnerships. We need solidarity. It's coming together. And it's allyship across differences, religion and gender and race. It's when we can do this, we're at our best. And then each of the papers in the special issue, and what we do so well at the University of Michigan, is we close the learning doing gap. We are action-based learning researchers. You had theories of change, and you use those theories of change to do the anti-racism work. So thank you. This was a remarkable panel. I have some logistic things also in the benediction. Thank you to the NCID production team. We want to make sure that everybody who is on here today does our post-event survey, and this will appear in your web browser when the event ends. And then finally, I want us to all who are on this panel, who are listening, who are participants, this is a hard time for anti-racism work. As Whitney suggested, people are trying to cancel, people are trying to foreclose. But you know what? We're strong. We are going to keep hope alive. We know that imagination and possibility will get this work done, and we can lead from the head, the heart, and the hand. So thank you each, and have a great day.